Thank you all for being here. We are super excited to dig into what we all feel is a really important topic. And I think there's going to be time at the end for questions, hopefully. So I've got some pre-planned questions here that we'll dig into some topics. We're going to touch on everything from profit and passion, but also get into all sorts of nuances around customer perception of quality, how we balance passion and profit, and just the overall experience that we are all seeking, whether you're an ingredient supplier, a software company, or a restaurateur. So let's dig in. So first question that I wanted to just kind of kick things off, obviously passion's the first word and the topic for today's panel. How would you all describe passion? What gets you up in the morning? We can just go straight down the line.
Probably a lot of us think the same way. Like, this could never be a job. You know, I don't think that this is, being a chef isn't something you run out and think, wow, that's the job I want to do. You have to be passionate. You have to love it, because what you have to put into it every day is really, it's probably one of the harder jobs you could professions you could get into. But the reward is what you get every day, every night, when you get to walk out and see all the people eating in your restaurant and see the creations that you and your team have made, watch it all come to life, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a dish, anything about it. And that's what makes, I think that's what at least makes me get up every morning, is thinking about, boy, we're really blessed. We get to create, we get immediate gratification, and we get to touch a lot of people's lives.
Okay, this is on. So before I started Fix, I'd owned restaurants as well, and I'd always wanted to open up. I wanted to be like the next Chipotle founder since I was like 13 years old. And so I loved this industry because, like Michael said, it's one of the only industries where you get instant gratification. When you serve someone good food and you give someone a great experience, you see how happy they are right afterwards. In other professions like legal or doctors or things like that, it could take a lot longer to kind of get that benefit. And then eventually when I started Fix, I kind of turned that same passion to talking with actual restaurants and seeing, what drives them and what makes them tick and how we can be a better service of helping all of these other restaurateurs. So I kind of parlayed the passion for serving, the customers, and now restaurants are our customers. And so that's kind of what drives us every single day.
Yeah, I spent most of my career as a chef and now in tech. I think anything that you really love is also supposed to be really hard, I think. And so, for me, I think passion is something that's joyful specifically to you. And when you find something that is very hard to distinguish between work and play, that's when I think you have something really good. For me, I've always been obsessed with finding the thing that that most people overlook or disregard or think is not worth improving upon, and then going like ridiculously deep into the weeds to create something that's brand new but also feels very instantly familiar. So in my early days after fine dining, that was recreating the hot dog and thinking about what would it be like if a hot dog had like incredible ingredients, and we worked with organic farmers, and we made our own sauerkraut, and we thought about the importance of acidity and sweetness in every condiment, and what would it be like if we applied those same techniques of fine dining to a hot dog? And now I have a recipe technology company, and I think about what would it be like if organizing and managing recipes in a kitchen didn't suck? Like, what if that was easy? And what if we didn't have to do all that math? And what if all we had to do was think about what we wanted to build and create and our vision, and everything else was taken care of? And so that's, for me, is where I sort of derive that joy, is giving people joy in something that they otherwise may have hated or thought was not even possible to improve upon.
Thanks. I think we're going to come back to that hot dog example, because I think this idea of innovating and rethinking sort of the vision in line of profitability, I think, is a really important one. So, Suzanne?
I would just say I agree with Michael. It's not a job. It's basically your life. So you better make it really good. But I think for me, it's I really love to cook. I love creating spaces. I love the community that the restaurants create. But I also, for me, a lot of it's the staff. I have people since we opened in 1998, and I have people who've worked for me for 20 years. And I just, their families. And when you bring more people into that restaurant family, like getting to go to work every day and see those people and work together, it almost gets better and better, even though the work part, like where we are now, which we probably will talk about, just makes things harder and harder. But I feel like that community part and like farmers and winemakers and all the people that you kind of collect and become part of your family over the years, like that is to me the passion. That's what keeps me going.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that people part. And we always say this at Guittard, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that's wholly true. So moving on, thanks everyone for your answers. So we all recognize how lucky we are to either make an ingredient or craft food for people to enjoy. We celebrate our craft, yet we also can't lose sight that we're also running a business. How do you balance creativity and craft with the pressures of the bottom line? That's a very specific question.
So, I think it's probably one of the things that we all have to think about the most. And I think probably one of the parts of this industry that I hate the most is how many unbelievably talented chefs that we have probably seen throughout our life that have just ridiculous talent that nobody in this room knows because their business didn't make it. And that, that's the part of it that really wakes you up and says, okay, well, how do you make it, and how do you do exactly what you just said? How are you going to balance it? And I think it isn't a one answer fits all, because different size restaurants, there's really different business models out there based on what type of restaurant you are, based on what your check average is, based on so many variables. So I'll talk about my restaurants and how we do it. And it has become harder and harder. There's no doubt about it. It's become harder and harder as time has gone on. But I think the thing that I always talk to everyone on my team about is, let's not make it a race to the bottom. Let's not figure out how we can cut and get to profitability. When I look at the people that run our restaurants, because at the end of the day, everybody is so important in a restaurant. Every single person on the staff, but the chef and general manager of the restaurant carry a lot of burden, carry a lot of responsibility. And sometimes they will be great at the financial side of running the business. But honestly, that isn't the key in our business. The key in our business is how can you drive top line, not bottom line. The top line kind of solves everything. And to do that, it's an enormous amount of discipline. It is really an enormous amount of discipline. You have to be working. The way we look at it is like, we're working on calendars that are 3.5 to 4 months ahead of time, all the time. Every holiday, every weekend. There are certain times when you just aren't, like, in this world, it's gotten harder and harder to do a second seating, or to get 2 seatings in your restaurant. All these things have gotten harder and harder. You have to take advantage of the times when there is revenue to be had. And you have to constantly create in a way in which you're creating, I call it revenue and relevance. And those are the 2 things that, like, everything you do, think about what's it going to bring your restaurant in revenue and what's it going to bring it in relevance. And so constantly doing the things that are, whether they're wine dinners, whether they're this or that, it's easy to overlook those things and to just not do them. But at the end of the day, if you're constantly doing that, you're going to give yourself a much better chance of driving top line, which then in turn is going to let you have the ingredients, the staff, the things you need to run your restaurant the right way. And that's kind of the way we focus on it.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question about covers, but we'll get to that in a second. But Suzanne, just a quick question kind of on the same topic. At what point in the R&D process does sort of profit come into the equation? An R&D process, not just necessarily recipe development and creating menu design, but also, restaurant design and customer experience.
Well, I think it's part of it for me now all the time.
Yeah.
That's they go hand in hand. I mean, for example, when we opened our restaurant Tavern in 2008, it was the first time we spent $3 million on that restaurant, which we had never done. We were so scrappy. We opened Luke for like $450,000. And we had AOC, and then we were moving to Brentwood, and it was a big space, and it was a fancy neighborhood, and we kind of blew it out, and we spent $3 million, which now is probably nothing, but at the time to us was a lot of money. And then, of course, the financial crash happened, like right as we were opening, and it took us like 10 years to dig out of that hole, to finally get to the point where we could start to have a return to our investors, start to actually have real profit that wasn't just going back to paying off that debt. And I have that like seared in my brain in the like do not do again department. So I think you learn from your mistakes, and it was a beautiful restaurant. We dug our way out of it, but I feel like every time I'm thinking of a dish, I'm weighing that in my head. Now I'm not a foie gras truffle person, so for me it's more about like the vegetables, finding really great protein. But there's times where there's a beautiful Sonoma lamb and they want to sell me whole lambs. I can't do it, and it sucks. Like, I would love to do that. I would love to have it on the menu. But when I look at it and what I would have to charge, I just feel like I'm not sure people would pay it. It skews our check average too high. And for us, I think as a restaurant that's been around for 22 years, that value, what people see as value and what people see, right now, I feel like there's a big fear of like, it's too expensive. Like, people are obsessed with like how expensive everything is. So it used to be, I feel like I would have put that lamb dish on the menu and I would have charged more, and people would have had value. They would have known value for it. We would have told the story about who grew it, and people would have paid it. I feel like now people are very, very conscious about the price. And so I don't even want to put that number on my menu because you worry about scaring people off. And that's hard. So to me, instead, it's like, okay, what would I have done with that whole lamb? And I think, okay, actually I could get lamb necks. And why don't I get, which is an incredibly delicious meat. It's like cheap. So how do I take that product and then make it into a dish that's as delicious as that whole Sonoma lamb would have been, but that actually can make money? And that's when actually I feel like the limitations actually inspire creativity. And I love that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was going to say, does that make your jellies like angry, or do you get excited about the possibility of having to pivot your brain to be like, okay, that's not going to work, but let me figure out a way to make this work?
I guess it's kind of both, because I want to also support that guy who's raising the lamb.
Right.
And so to not be able to do that sucks. But I also, I'm a realist too. So I think I know that I have to be kind of crafty,
Well, Josh and Ryan, I mean, you guys are essentially consultants to your clients, right? And so how do you guys help facilitate profitability when you see an opportunity like that, or see a business problem that you're able to sort of glean a different perspective on, glean perspective on through the services, or just being able to have like a different angle, being able to come into the restaurant and have insight in whether it's recipe, cataloging, or just, costing services.
Yeah, I mean, at meez, we really believe the profit starts with the recipe, and that seems simplistic, like, oh, the recipe cost should be good, but there's so much more to that. And generally speaking, I don't think that creativity can exist without constraints, right? So I think we should set the stage there. Like, it's not really a craft, or there's not some sort of cost constraint or time constraint or a resource constraint. Otherwise, we're just kind of, just sort of this flippant kind of art, which we don't do, right? So there are these constraints that you have to have, and the way that we think about it at meez of how we help our customers is first and foremost that profit starts with the recipe. So the way that you engineer the recipe, not just thinking through what ingredients can I use, but who do I have on my team that can execute this if I want to do this every day at scale and make sure it's the same, right? Like what techniques can I use that are going to be, that my team's going to be able to execute? Can I cross-utilize things? And of course, can I look at this menu at large, the entirety of the menu, and understand the impact of what I sell this item for? And then do I make sure that this recipe is so explicit that my team can execute it every single day? And if you waste food, if you don't have a very explicit way to execute something, one, your guests won't return, right? Who's not terrified of coming back the next time for the same dish and it tastes different? And you waste food, which means you lose money. So that's why for us, like we really drill home, like it starts with the recipe. You have to make sure you engineer this thing, and thinking about that paradigm of what is a recipe. It's your vision for this thing that you're going to create, that your team's going to execute for you, and you have to be empathetic to how they're going to execute it, how your customers are going to pay for it, and the business at large. So for us, it really does start like right at the beginning.
So like at Fix, we have a lot of clients that are like SMBs, right? And like Chef Michael Mina said that a lot of chefs, will open up restaurants and they're going to have the best food in the world. But a lot of times those restaurants end up, they end up closing within the first year because they just don't know how to actually manage their business. Obviously, I'm coming from like the financial standpoint, which may not be the most popular at times, but ultimately your passion, you can't be so passionate that you're stubborn and not take like a look of what actually is happening. So we always try to present, not even financials, because I think financials and data overwhelms a lot of operators and people that are running restaurants. We try to really simplify and say like, hey, like if you can do these 3 things this month, then the next month you'll win. And, if you can buy this food from this particular vendor, or maybe cut down on the one particular cost that seems to be skewing out of the norm, we just try to give our customers kind of quick, easy decisions to win. And then going forward, they can focus on the passion that drives the menu and drives the revenue like everyone is talking about. I'm involved in some restaurants right now where, look, like this city is tough to run restaurants right now between all of the rising costs, which everyone here knows. And we have a couple of dog locations. And my partner in those restaurants, I think we've kind of held on to those locations longer than I would have liked. And I think we've finally said, like, we got to take a cold, hard look in the mirror and say, look, not every location is going to be a winner. You think you're going to open up, every restaurant is going to hit a home run. And like, it just doesn't. No one bats 1,000. McDonald's doesn't even bat 1,000. So at a certain point, you got to say, look, this isn't working. Let's cut bait and let's refocus and reallocate our resources to the ones that are actually doing well. And I would imagine that probably happens within menus and seasons and things like that. And I think sometimes it's tough for operators, even myself, to take a look at the stuff that isn't going well and say to yourself, hey, maybe we got to refocus our efforts elsewhere.
That's great. And let's try to make it also a little bit more tangible for the restaurants as well. So Michael and Suzanne, you mentioned sort of top line as well, rather than just bottom line, but are there ways that you've found actual tangible examples that you can give that help you sort of preserve that creativity and innovation while also making sure that you're still maintaining profitability? I know you gave some examples early on, but maybe some other examples that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Suzanne said obviously is very much in line of, it does start with where's the limit for your clientele? Kind of what are people expecting when they come to your restaurant? What are they expecting to spend? But I'll go back to the same thing. I think that you have to be extremely, extremely focused on the times when you are going to be able to drive revenue. And so those are holidays. Those are holidays and happenings. Those are, certain nights of the week. Those are creating experiential events. Those are really event business if you have the space for it and if you can do it. I mean, you look at so many restaurants now, and I think it was really one of the interesting things coming out of the pandemic was how creative people got. And how creative people got with different ways to, drive extra revenue into their restaurant. And, you see so many different things. Like, I just saw a restaurant in DC that was doing something really cool. They created a community table, it was called, right? But it was kind of similar to, if you think about the 2-star Lazy Bear restaurant in San Francisco, which is that's a very upscale version of it. But this restaurant actually created it 16 top within the restaurant, right? And they almost created a restaurant within the restaurant. And so, I think that it's really does take a little bit of thinking outside the box right now And that's the parts that's actually pretty fun about, when you start to get to do different style menus, different, we just went to something that we're doing in a lot of our restaurants, and it's like we do a large format menu, and you have to order it 24 hours in advance, and it's for 8 or more people. And it is fun because, like, some of those things you were talking about, like, you can get whole animals. You can do things that actually are cost effective and really delicious, but you need that time to prep it. You need to know in advance.
Just really quickly, a follow-up question, and then I'll pop it back up to you, Suzanne. It's just, so I'm curious, when you host those types of events, are you finding that it's a wholly separate type of customer who's attending those events? Or are they oftentimes also going to a two-top or, dining at your restaurants as a regular diner? Kind of varies.
In all honesty, it has so much to do with the loyalty that you build with your clientele.
Yeah. Totally.
Because if we're doing it right, we never even advertise it. We literally are just doing it out of our, VIP database or whatever it is. You're never advertising it. And it, and you want it to be experiential. I mean, it has to be something that people are like, wow, I got into this, and it never went out to the public.
Right. Great.
I was just gonna say, for sure, the driving the top line answers everything, right?
Yep.
So I think the hard thing, and we do the same thing, like probably, I'm motivated now to do more events, but it's hard sometimes, you're doing your thing and it's like exhausting, and the dishwasher's calling out or whatever's happening, but you do have to keep pushing and pushing like that to keep creating new events and celebrating, coming up with things to celebrate and having farmer dinners and winemaker dinners, because that is what brings the top line in. I think for us, especially now in LA, it's like it's looking at, it's like cutting costs too. Like, what can we cut without cutting quality and the guest experience? And I think actually it's funny. I think it's where the building of the team actually ties in and benefits us, because we do have certain nights. Like if we have a slow Tuesday night, we'll call somebody off and we'll go with one less person on the line. And I can do that because everybody's been with me a long time. They're badasses. They love each other. They don't want the other person to go down in flames. And so it's like everyone shifts to the pantry station and helps everybody. Then everybody shifts to oven, and they actually have more fun because it's not fun to be slow. So they have a more fun night, and we kind of save that, that one person for the night. Or it's just having a talk with my team. Like we used to always have 2 dishwashers. We had an upstairs dishwasher and downstairs dishwasher. Okay. During the week, we don't need to have 2 dishwashers. I know you like it, and I know it helps because they deep clean and they put things away and whatever, but it's like, do we actually need that to run the business? And the answer is no. It becomes kind of like a luxury. So, okay, we cut that out on certain nights during the week, and everybody just works together and gets it done. And the thing that seemed impossible, it seemed like, oh, we can't do that, we need that person. When you do it, actually, if you have the right people doing it with you and for you, it's like, oh, we actually can do that.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. I mean, it's sort of this idea of, profitability. We talk about profitability, but the sustainability of your restaurants is wholly related to the success of your team and building that team camaraderie. And that's a huge testament to your ability to do that. And also just to create a sense of trust, right? Yeah. And that's where that comes from. And that will lead to downstream profitability, right?
Yeah. This is gonna date me, but I remember when September 11th happened, and we were at Old AOC, we had a cheese bar, and it was my favorite thing. It was like my favorite thing when we created that restaurant. When you walked in, you saw this like beautiful refrigeration with all this display of all the salumi and charcuterie and the cheeses. And actually, I used to work that station, so I would make the cheese plates every night and make the meat plates, and people would sit at the cheese bar. It was like 10 seats, and it was like it was the best. So September 11th happens, business tanks. We're meeting with our CPA or our financial, accounting people. And the guy's telling me, like, something has to give. Like, you have to cut labor, you have to cut food cost, you have to cut something. So he's like, you need to cut one person out of the kitchen. So I was like, okay, what am I gonna, I can't, I need a person on the grill, I need a person. And I was like, okay, I was like, well, we can't, I can't cut anybody. I need somebody on the cheese bar. I need this. And he goes, okay, well, then you're not gonna have a restaurant. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and I actually moved the cheese, I gave up that thing that I loved. And I moved the cheese cut. I moved that stuff into pantry. And of course, the pantry people at first are like, there's no way, we can't do all that, da, 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 da. And of course, once we do it and you work with them and you show them that it can be done, and that's a little bit of like gut punch, I mean, I loved that part of the restaurant so much, but in the end, like my option is to not have a restaurant. So
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that there's something about this idea of innovation, right? And I think we're always thinking, well, what's new? Like innovation, what's new? But I think there's also a way to think about innovation reflecting on what you think you already know and sort of rethinking that. Josh, you brought that up in a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, sort of this idea of like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be this esoteric thing that no one's thought of. It could be, let me just take a little moment and self-reflect on how I'm running my business and like maybe I can shift things a little bit. Anyway.
I had a question actually. So I feel like most restaurants, because I've done the same thing, like when it's busy and you have a lot of sales are coming in and just like, let me just add another staff, we'll add overtime. Who cares? We're going to have the sales. It's going to be fantastic, right? And then you end up not making maybe as much money as you probably should have. And then when you do have the downturn in your slower season and the times when you do want to cut, and you probably can't cut that much because at a certain point you're going to affect service and quality of food. I feel like a lot, and I've made this mistake plenty of times too. It's like we get this tendency that yes, revenue cures all, but we can't also kind of say like, we're just not going to like be blind to it and try to make those really great revenue days, like you were saying, like as profitable as you can. So that way you can weather the storms of like the slower times and the times when you're going to need to cut, but you can't go below a certain threshold.
Yeah, I think you have to keep the lessons that you learned when times were tough, and keep those lessons when times are good. I mean, that's the
100%.
That's the key.
Yeah.
100%. And trust me, revenue doesn't cure all.
Right.
If you don't have the discipline behind it up front, where what you just said, it's, you see it all the time. Oh, this is going to be a huge Thanksgiving. This is going to be whatever it is. If you don't have the discipline to really, and it really does help if you have somebody really good in finance, obviously, but you got to really have the discipline to really understand, is that revenue really going to come in? And really have that laid out in a way. And that's what I said is like, to create that kind of any sort of lift, because even a little lift helps a lot because you usually don't have to staff more for it, right? It's a lot of times the 15 covers are better than the 45 covers because you didn't have to staff any different or you didn't have to do anything any different, right? And so it's not the perfect science to it is just, that's where a lot of the hard work goes is, are you going to take that 3 months ahead of time to really look at how you're going to market, how you're going to do it, how you're going to create that particular event, and then be very disciplined about not overshooting it?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are all really important points. I want to ask a 2.5-part question.
2.5.
It's like 2.5,
Okay.
yeah. So we all have this idea that customers will never fully understand the true cost of a dish, right? It also happens with chocolate. Like no one totally understands everything that goes into chocolate. So again, 2.5 parts. Do you all think there will ever be a world where the perception of the customer is aligned with the actual true cost? And when we say true cost, I'm not just talking the ingredients, but we're talking the labor, the experience, that like everything that goes into creating this beautiful moment that people are choosing to take part in, anyway, I could go on and on, but so.
I mean, I think there are people who get it and people who are never going to get it. I mean, we definitely have a really loyal clientele, and I feel like, do they understand like how we get to that number? No, they don't, but they value.
Yes,
it's worth it to them.
Yep.
So whether they understand, whether that answers the question or not, but for them, it's worth it. And then there's people who just
don't and never will.
Never will.
Yeah.
I think this is where like the experience really helps, and there is a job of us to tell a story that helps and create an experience that is more than the sum of the parts of the food. I mean, we talked about this on the call, and I think about this all the time. You go and you eat somewhere, and no one will ever be able to quantify like the cost of what they just ate, because if they try to say, well, that shrimp I can get at the store, if you can even get it, because you probably can't get those kinds of prawns. But to have it on time, on demand, every day in that setting, and they'll clean up after you. And when your glass breaks, they get you a new one, and the music is playing, and the air is the right temperature, and the light is the right temperature. And when you have something else that you're thinking of ordering, someone is there to order that for you. And when you're done, someone cleans up for you. All of that, if someone did that in your house, is like, wow, I would love to have that. But, there is this ceiling because, there's a difference between a commodity and experience. Obviously you go to a spa and you pay $150 for the pleasure of being there. And then you pay for your smoothie and you pay for your sandwich on top of that. And I do think that it is incredible. I think it's amazing to see what people are doing in restaurants now of creating more of an experience, and it doesn't always have to be something interactive, but more of a feeling. I have that feeling when I go to your restaurant, and I just feel like I'm transported. I feel someplace special, and I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to pay more because I'm getting away from my day to day, and that's the job, right? And that's with anything is you have to give them something that is an order of magnitude better than sitting at home. And that's the only time that I think when that perception starts to rise. But no matter what, there's a ceiling. A burger can only cost so much until it's a novelty.
So like my family, and I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and we recently implemented this new tradition where every Friday night we go out to dinner, the four of us, and we rotate whose choice it is. And whoever chooses, no one could argue with whatever they're choosing. Now, the first
I thought you were
week,
going to say whoever chooses pays the bill.
well, unfortunately, the first week, my 7-year-old kind of got one over us and chose Dave and Buster's, but that's okay. However, afterwards, we do a review. We ask our kids and myself, like, what was the food? What was the ambiance? What was the service? What was the value, right? And it's really interesting hearing the reactions to it, because my wife and I were like, oh, that food sucked. And then the kids are like, oh, but they appreciated the service and the ambiance was just awesome. And I was like, I didn't think of it through their shoes at times. So like one of my kids loves the Heidi Lau hot pot place in Century City. And if you haven't taken your kids there, it is awesome. Like the ambiance is fantastic. And then another time we took them to Fogo de Chao and they're like, this is the most incredible experience. And I'm like, oh, like going through these experiences through like a 7 and a 10-year-old, and you didn't really realize this because you've already been there so many times. It kind of has tweaked my perception of like the value that you see in some of these restaurants that you may not have gone to in a long time. So I just thought it was like an interesting tidbit from like my actual life.
I think that this is a very interesting question because, perception of value, right? So like what Susan said earlier, she built a restaurant and learned a lesson, doesn't want to do it again. It took 10 years to pay it off, right? So the cost of building that restaurant is got to get factored into the cost, right? And we see it right now more than ever because it's like saying, okay, well, how do you decide or how do people associate the value? You can go have a great, taco in the Mission and pay $4 and, there's definitely a value for that. And then we watch the same people go to the modern day, I call them clubstaurants, right? And they're catching things on fire and opening suitcases and charging you $1,000 or something, right? And so but they probably spent $35 million to build the place out. And it's more of a show than it is a dining experience, or it's more of a scene than it is a dining experience. And so it's a hard question to answer because I think so much of it depends on who the customer is and what they're looking for, and I just, do they know how much it costs? I doubt they really know everything that it costs, but what are they looking for and what is the value to them? I wouldn't go to a place and order a steak in a suitcase and pay an extra $1,000 for it, but plenty of people do. So,
No, that's a good reminder. And I think just taking into account, there's so many costs that you need to take into account, but this idea of the cost framework of an experience and your cost of ingredients and balancing that, but it also takes a keen eye to making sure that you know who your customer is and what they're on both sides of the equation, right? Okay, well, I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So I'm going to ask one question to the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So I guess sort of last question, what's the one thing that you hope the audience will take away from today's discussion?
Take away from today's discussion, well...
Or life in general.
Yeah. Look, sometimes it is a very ugly picture that gets painted on how hard it is to succeed in this business, right? But if you really, if this is what you're passionate about and you really want to do it, put the upfront work into it, learning about like what we talked about, learn those numbers, learn all the business side of it, learn everything. That's why you go work for people. That's why you go try to get as many experiences as you can get and pick everybody's brain. It isn't just an hour with us up here, Pick everybody's brain, but don't give up on it because it's really, really rewarding in the end.
I'll add on to that. I think that like a lot of people open up restaurants and it's a very passionate business. Like Josh said, it's hard and it's hard to do well, but you also have to be honest with yourself and say, let me look at all aspects of the operation besides just the cooking or the service, and that includes the financials, and not be afraid to look at them. And then the other thing, if everyone could learn, is don't let your kids choose Dave and Buster's for like the.
I just need to get my kids to actually eat out at a restaurant. They still won't do that. It's just feta cheese and nuts. I think I'll just sort of reiterate what I maybe said in the beginning, which was just embrace constraints, like lean into them. And in any business and in restaurants specifically, I think oftentimes we think of it as a negative, like, I can't use this product, or I have to have this price, or I can only have this many team members, and that's all true. And yes, it's all very hard. So the worst thing you could do is let that get to the point where you're just not having fun anymore. And your entire team should be leaning into this. Just lean into the constraints. Make sure you define what those constraints are for your business, whether it's a food cost or a price point or how many people or what size space we can have or how many locations we can have. And then just really lean into it, and actually enjoy creating within those constraints. And I think you'll have a lot more fun.
I would say I think that the independent restaurant community, or independent restaurants are worth fighting for. And I think we all have to really fight right now. I was actually just talking to Alice Waters in the green room, and she said, restaurants have the power to change the world, and restaurants kind of reflect our humanity. And I think it is that restaurants speak to our senses, besides everything else. Like, we speak to people's senses, but we give them those experiences that they don't otherwise. They don't even know what's touching them, but there's something about feeding each other, being together, eating together. And I think the community that restaurants bring together, we were just, Saturday, we just raised $1.3 million for children's cancer with like this. Yeah. So I think that like the power of what our community can do is impressive and should hopefully unstoppable, but it is a really, really hard time right now. So I think everybody in this room probably already knows that, but I think we have to find a way to push through and preserve restaurants. Like our restaurant that we just closed, AOC Brentwood, basically our landlord has been trying to push us out for 2 years, and they're putting an aloe in because they can get 50% more rent. So they just didn't want us there anymore. And we were there 16 years. So I think it's a really tough time, but we need to band together and find ways and put pressure on government. I don't know ways to do it, but I think it's worth preserving. It's what I don't know. It's like when the pandemic happened. Nancy called me. She goes, "I don't know how to do anything else. Do you?" And I was like, "No, I don't know how to do anything else." So we need to, it's like this is what we do. It's what we know how to do. It's what we love, and I think, we just need to save it and keep doing what we're doing. So,
thank you all so much. Thanks for attending.